First of all, thank you everybody for having us down here today. We really enjoyed travelling around to tell our story. I represent a few vets at our clinic in Bell. Do any of you know where Bell is? Has anyone ever been there? Raise your hands. Thank you. We've got about 6, 7. So we're a small town. We've got about 200 people living in our town. We've got 5 veterinarians. In our clinic, we employ 20 people, so we employ 10% of the town. We're the biggest employer in our district other than the school. So we're proud cattle people, as all of you are, and we enjoy talking about this stuff here. So today, the topic that I'm going to talk to you about is something that's very dear to my heart. It's how we manage our weaned calves. It's really simple stuff. And there's some stuff that we're doing with animal behaviour now that's giving credence to improving the productivity of these cattle, but also setting them up for the future. So what we're going to start off with is we're going to look at what weaning is and why we're here talking to you guys as Hereford breeders. But first of all, we've got some common goals for weaning, and they're pretty basic. We want to be able to set cattle up for good health and good performance, but we don't want to lose money while we do it, right? That's one of the common misconceptions of yard weaning cattle is the moment I do it, people won't buy my cattle because they'll lose a milk sheen at a calf sale. And we really need to get beyond that because the health benefits of doing this stuff are absolutely second to none. If we did a better job at this as an industry, we already do a good job. We're way in front of the Americans. Enoch, absolutely, we actually wean. We don't put them onto a truck most of the time. So we're always in front just there, but there are always ways that we can get better. So what I want to talk to you about today is a little bit of stark and a little bit of depressing data to start with. I promise we're going to lift the mood as we go along. So if it's clear enough up there, this is a take out of the MLA BRD initiative from 2015. So this is out of the epidemiology study, and as you can see up here, we've got 35,000 head that we're looking at in this entire study, and they followed these cattle through and basically benchmarked whether you're more likely to get sick or more likely to die from BRD in the feedlot. And this is the breed correlations that they put together, and the odds ratio, which is this one here, the Angus is the reference animal. There are a lot of Angus animals represented in this study, and as a comparison, all the breeds are put on there as well. As you can see, as Hereford producers, we're sitting at 2 times the likelihood of a standard black-hided Angus animal to get sick before day 50 in the feedlot. Now, this data didn't tell us anything we didn't already know. We knew this stuff long ago. What we're going to talk about today is how we improve that, what we can do, and simply with yard weaning, we can ameliorate a lot of this, but if we add some pre-vaccination into it, we can get these cattle really ready for future challenges. Really important stuff. The thing that perplexes me about this, I agree with the Brahmins, but the Murray Greys, I'm not too sure that I really appreciate the Murray Greys having half the risk. That smuck colour that we were talking about before, it pretty well describes those little guys. Hope none of you have got any. So here's some smuck coloured cattle for you guys to have a look at. It's, my videos are a bit dicky, so you have to bear with me while they start. How many of us get to experience this? How many of us have experienced this in the last 6 months? This, to be honest with you guys, this scares the shit out of me. Absolutely. I think that's probably enough. Pretty common sight. Who's seen it? Who's been there and who's dealt with it? You can be honest. I have. I deal with it a lot, and sometimes we deal with it at the feedlot when we probably shouldn't have to. So what's wrong with that situation? We've got cattle there that have been locked up for the first time in their lives. Massive, massive deal for these guys. Pulled off their mother, and what are they trying to do? They're trying to find a way out. They're trying to find a fence to crawl over. Are they thinking about eating? No. Are they thinking about drinking? Certainly not. These cattle are stressed out of their minds, and there's stuff that we can do with the weaning process that reduces that, turns them into better citizens. So when we look at health problems in the feedlot, we've got two big issues, right? The first one is the immune status of the cattle coming in. If they've got no immune system or they're a PI, well, I don't have much hope for them. The other one's the stress level. Cattle that are stressed at arrival, when we look at immune status at arrival and we break it down, we've got an element of active immunity, so what they come in with. The vaccination status can change that. The age, old cattle versus young cattle, balling calves have a higher risk of feedlot mortality than an animal that's backgrounded for a period of over 28 days. And Enoch's going to go through a lot more of that data in depth with you guys. And then the stress load. So when we look at stress, stress is a big word, right? We get stressed for all kinds of different reasons, and stress it's not discriminatory. It affects everybody at different stages and to different amounts, and it's how we cope with that stress. It influences how we actually go on from that point. What do you reckon the biggest, in the feedlot, right? What do you think the biggest stressor on cattle is? Well, there's lots of stresses, but what do you think the biggest one might be? Other cattle, that's up there. So commingling. And when commingle adds stress, got to make new friends, go to new school. Anything else? I'll show you the biggest one, and it's this one right here. This is like the prison effect, confinement anxiety. You take an animal that's been on its mother for a long period of time, it's been seeing a fence line once or twice a day when it comes into water, and now we're going to put him inside a 4-fence cell and ask him to just go about his business. This guy doesn't do well with the confinement anxiety. And when we talk about yard weaning, this is arguably one of the biggest benefits. We've got a massive opportunity to tune these cattle into confinement anxiety and to be the reason why that reduces. So the handling of these cattle is absolutely critical to reduce this confinement anxiety. Other stresses, poor handling is another stressor. So cattle that are handled poorly stress out. And when we've got confinement anxiety plus poor handling, then we get poor performance, then we get sickness. So when we go through, the end of the day, we're essentially looking at this, and we don't want to anthropomorphise these things, right? Cattle are cattle, people are people, and we're not going to try and give human feelings to cattle, but there's an element of this psychological trauma going on in these cattle that we need to fix. Confinement anxiety, relocation anxiety, and a fear of humans are 3 things that we can reduce with a really solid yard weaning program. And it's really simple to do. At the end of the day, we need to recognise that all stress adds up. There's you can't just pull the plug and it goes away. It's got to go up and it's got to go down. You can't just take it away. So when we look at fixing health problems, my first priority is how can we reduce stress levels? Well, we can do it with purchase decisions and say, we're just not going to go and buy those calves from that sale. We can improve the immune status by giving them a pre-vaccination like MH1 or Reinegard or Bacillus, whatever your preference is. But the important one is to reduce stress levels, right? And yard weaning's pretty effective at that. We've got a couple of options, right? When we say reduce stress levels, there's one way to go about it and say, my health comes in a bottle, I'm going to fix it like that. And I saw an ad like this last year in the US. It says, you can't avoid weaning stress, but you can outsmart it with an antibiotic. I don't think we're going to get into that kind of stuff, not in the current climate. I think it's kind of dangerous territory to be stepping into. When a management decision can change the level of stress, I don't think we need to pressure our antibiotics any more than we already are. So whilst we use antibiotics in regular production, this kind of stuff's probably not on anymore. We've really got to outsmart the weaning stress, not try and fix it with a bottled solution. So what do? Yard weaning is very simple and it's very effective. We love talking about it because it works every time. There are different ways that we've been working on that make it a little bit better. We've refined our techniques over the years, and this data here is some pretty old data. So you can see that on the first one here, it's a little small, but those blue bars represent sickness as percentage of animals pulled for BRD in the feeding period. So you can see that on the paddock wean cattle, their pull rate's at about 18%. So these are cattle that we just leave in the paddock. The yard trained cattle, so cattle that have come in to the yards, gone through them, probably onto a truck, not much human contact, those cattle are much better because there's been a commingling aspect, but when we actually start handling these animals, the yard weaning process really takes hold, and you can see that we go from around 18% pulled to around 3%. It's pretty profound. When we look at average weight gain, this is a clear winner as well. So the paddock wean cattle, we're well and truly behind anything to do with yard weaning. Now what we can investigate a little further is yard weaning versus yard training, and one of the things in our industry we've done a really poor job of in the last forever is if you go and ask any agent or anybody that's selling cattle what their definition of yard weaning is, if you ask 20 people, you get 23 different answers. Not 20, you get 23. Because everybody's got a different bias, everyone's got a different opinion. So maybe as an industry we need to settle on a good definition, on something that actually works for all of us. And from a way forward perspective, I think that's up there, and that might just be my mission in life at the moment, to try and get that definition in together. So that was a study done out of UNE and Armidale quite a long time ago. There's some newer research out there that shows that when we handle cattle differently, we can get different results. And this is one of a newer study. It's by a veterinarian called Nathan Meyer and Grant Duell in the US. And these guys, this is how they did it. They took 2,115 baby calves from Florida and they shipped them up to Greeley, up to a JBS yard, and they said, we're going to handle some of you differently and really shock you, and we're going to do the traditional stuff with the rest of you. And so what they did is they split them up, randomised them, and the alternative treated guys got split into one pen, and then the others got split into another. So it was done properly, and they metaphylaxed them on the way in with Draxxin, which was their standard. And then what they did different was this right here. When these alternative cattle arrived in the yard, they waited until they just rested just a little, and then they'd pick them up, take them to the bunk, and then take them away from the bunk. Then in the afternoon, about 8 hours later, they'd pick them up again, take them to the bunk, and take them away from the bunk. Really simple. These are Mexican cowboys. They said, Sancho, I want you to go and do it. And off he went, and he did it. And he did it pretty good. He did it his way. We didn't tell him how to ride his horse, which is important. But then the next bit was pretty neat. They took these cattle out and they walked them in the drover's alley for about 10 days. So each day they'd open the pen and they'd exercise those cattle out and bring them home. And again, some pretty profound results were found. So on your left-hand side, you can see the traditional handling mortality by diagnoses. We've got 4 colours in there. So the yellow is other, so these were animals that were too old to autopsy. The red ones are BRD cases, and the blue ones are musculos. The green ones are digestive deads. These are animals that died from bloat. These are animals that died from overeating, acidosis type events. In my mind, pretty preventable death loss. When we handled these cattle differently, these cattle completely obliterated all of this digestive death loss. So they had 18 bloat deads in the other group. When they handled their cattle differently and they intervened at a stressful time, these cattle performed better, they ate better, and they didn't die as much, to the tune of nearly 1%. So the overall death loss here is 2.19% on the overall group and 1.19% on the group that they did stuff with. Did it change the expression of respiratory disease? No, but it taught these cattle how to eat. It taught them how to exercise that variation out of them. So the p-value is not exactly where we'd want it to be, but the trend is pretty clear and pretty emphatic. So for an overall result, they spent 28 cents per head on labour. I don't care how much your labour cost is. You could make it $2.50 a head, you'd still come out at a 5-to-1 return on investment. And as far as I'm concerned, that's better than going to the TAB to put money on wings, right? So this stuff makes economic sense, everybody. When we're talking about yard weaning, it's not just a yard weaning process that starts on the first day when the cows get separated. We can imprint early knowledge on these cattle from a really early age And you know, the stage is really set when you handle them at preg testing. So the expectations of calves to move through the chute at preg testing, if it's not pleasant, they're probably not going to be that good the next time they go around. At calving, when we mark them, when we muster them, we can do little things with these calves by themselves in little groups to get them chilled out just a little bit before we start the big dance. So a place I was preg testing at just last week, we had some cattle get boxed up and some weaners ended up, they're due to be weaned, ended up with the cows. Anyway, we said, oh, we didn't have any space, so we just ran them through and we chucked them in and we put them through the chute, and of course they all turned around and they went back, and it took us an extra hour to get all these 50, 60 calves out amongst all these cows because they'd just keep getting out everywhere. Now, when I think about that, we should have just stopped and done something different because it really didn't teach those cattle anything positive at all. And the one thing, if we take home anything from today, is when an interaction is positive with an animal, they remember it really, really well. It's really profound. And if it's positive, they remember it for the next time. And I'm going to tell you some more stories about that coming up. So when we're talking about guidelines for yard weaning, what do I like to see? We want to have weaner-proof yards, right? If you've got yards that have got holes in them, it's going to be frustrating because they'll always end up outside. If you've got Wagyus, it'll be 10 times worse. Solid-sided pens are okay unless it's summertime and you need airflow and you need drainage. Narrow cabling usually works pretty well. We need water. We need water in a trough. It's got to be clean, it's got to be sexy. Now, I get really queer looks when people say, hey, Lockie, you want us to make the water sexy? Yeah, I want to make the water sexy. I want them to really enjoy it. I want them to get in there, I want it to see it move. If you ever clean out a water trough and watch what the cattle do once you clean that out, they love that. They really get around it. So the more we move it, the more we clean it, the more sexy we make that water. You will drive water intake by making water sexy, okay? I'm not mad, promise. 4 metres square per head is about right. We need to feed these cattle daily. Whether it's hay or silage, we need to make sure that their capacity to eat is fulfilled. We do not want hungry, exhausted little babies running around because hungry, exhausted little babies running around stressed equals sick, hungry, exhausted little babies that don't run around and die. So right now I'm trying to pick up the tempo because we're getting ready for Enoch's talk, so I'm going to talk really fast. And then everyone's going to be ready for it, okay? So when we talk about weaning misconceptions, everybody says, when you ask the 22 agents for the 28 different answers, they say, oh, well, it's got to be weaned for 10 days. Or they've got to be weaned for 7 days. I don't think we should wean for longer than 7 days. In fact, I think we can do it in 2 or 3 if we do it well. The Bell family, very happy to have worked with them over the years, and talking to them last night, and they're doing a 3-day wean program now. That's super impressive, and I'm really proud of them. So some human contact daily is important to create that influence, to create that stress relief, because at the end of the day, we're important to these cattle, and we need to show them that. So the issue that I come across more frequently than not is this question. It says, okay, Lockie, when should we work them? And the misconception and probably the myth that's out there at the moment is that, well, it's not at the moment, it's been there for the last probably 150 years, is that let's leave them there for 4 days until they shut up, and then we're going to jump in there, and once they're shut up, they'll work easier and we'll be able to take them around the place and they won't give us as much curry and just be easier for us. And I sort of look at it and go, 4 days is a long time, right? 4 days for that animal to stop bawling. You've got to think about why he actually stops bawling. Now, when he stops bawling, my thoughts on him stopping bawling is probably a voice. Sort of like, I will later on today. When you run out of voice and you've got nothing there to protect it, that's when you start getting some more respiratory disease. So start talking about this concept, and this was new to me, and we've been exploring this a lot, but I think it applies to cattle pretty well. So this is out of a psychology text from the 80s, right? It's pretty old school stuff, but it's kind of unique, and it kind of fits in with cattle, I think. And basically says that under stress, so when you're stressed, the residues of early experience are reinstated and incorporated, remembered, into memory where they directly control adult behaviour. Now, that sounds pretty neat, huh? So we can apply that in a couple of different ways. Basically, to understand that, you know, every interaction influences the next one. A good one builds confidence, and a bad one, well, you've got to rebuild that trust with that animal to go to the next level. We have an opportunity to teach, and we have an opportunity to get those cattle to retain information and develop trust with you guys as people. Have any of you guys ever seen this one before? This is called the performance and pressure curve, and this works perfectly for weaners, right? When we start off in the yards, let's have that animal in the paddock. He's chilling out, he's not doing anything. It says that he's lame. He's probably not lame, but he's inactive and he's bored. He's probably not doing much. You muster him and there's some healthy tension. He's still with his mother. He's hanging out. You put him in the yards with his mother and he's keen. He's looking around at the yards and he's motivated and focused. You pull his mother off and all of a sudden that stress level's huge. Where do we want to be teaching lessons? Do we want to be teaching lessons up here or down here? I think we want to be teaching lessons where the imprint is going to be strong. I think we want to be teaching lessons where we have cattle that are motivated and focused rather than fatigued and exhausted, because the retention of information is so much greater. It's absolutely magical what this does. So we're going to come back to the performance pressure curve, but first I want to tell you a little rapid learning type story first. And I was preg testing at a place and we'd been preg testing for 3 or 4 days and just banking weaners, and I'd sort of get out there and play with them in the afternoons just to tick my mental box for the day that I'd done something good. And then this bloke showed up with like a trailer full of dogs and a whole lot, a couple of stock whips and stuff, and I said, "Oh, hi, I'm Lockie, I'm the vet." He goes, "We'll call him Jim, all right? It's not his real name, but Jim." I said, "Jim, what are you here for?" He goes, I'm here to break these weaners." I said, "What are you going to break, their legs or their fucking hearts?" That wasn't off to a good start, right? So Jim said, I said, "Jim, you're late." He goes, "I'm not late. I start on the 4th day." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because it's too much work for my dogs otherwise." I said, "Jim, you're..." And I stopped. I said I wasn't going to fight with him, so I said, "Instead, I'm going to fight with you. I'm going to play with you, Jim." And I said, "Jim, have you ever been overseas before?" He said, "Yeah, a matter of fact, I have." I said, "That's good. Makes this go along all right." I said, "Where have you been, Jim? Like, where'd you go? What was the first place you ever went when you went overseas?" He goes, "Lockie, I went to Johannesburg. We went to South Africa on a polo cross tour and I was 18. I said, "Brilliant. How was the flight? Who'd you fly with?" "Oh, we flew Cathay Pacific into Joburg. Long flight. Did you sleep?" "Nah. Too excited. Way too excited." "Were you hungry when you got there?" "Yeah, pretty hungry." "What was the airport like?" "Well, yeah, it was white marble floor. Security guards, machine guns." "Yeah, whole lot." And he remembers all this, right? I said, "Jim, when you got to the motel, you were probably hungry, right?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "Did you eat?" He goes, I did. I ate." And when he ate, I said, "What'd you eat?" He goes, "Well, I had a rice. It was sort of burnt underneath. And then on top, like, we had a curry, like a chicken curry. And it was all right." I said, "Okay, what colour was the plate?" He said, "Lockie, the plate was blue." I said, "Jim, you got a really good memory, mate." Like, that's brilliant. On the 4th day, "Jim, what did you eat and what colour was the plate?" And Jim, for the life of him, could not tell me the colour of the plate nor what he ate, because by the time that stress had really hit the rock bottom and hit the floor, he didn't remember a thing about it. But he remembers to this very day exactly the colour of the plate that day that he was so stressed. So why am I talking about Jim? Is that when we learn under pressure, when we learn under stress, the memories that we make are very vivid. And so when we're talking about working with weaners and prolonging that time to work with them for up to 4 days, I think we need to get there on day 1, when that stress is really hitting the roof. And if you can get back to this performance and pressure curve just here and start getting these cattle in this focus zone, you're going to get a lot more good learning and a lot more good energy out of them than if we get down to this anxiety and anger zone. The moment these cattle have to figure out the way around that pen by themselves, you mean absolutely nothing to them. So take home two for the day is, let's get in with these cattle really early and make a really lasting and profound difference. When you start early, the time it takes for you to achieve your goals of weaning, it really condenses it, and we know that we can practically do a good quality job on weaners and have them straight out of the yards within 2 or 3 days when we have a good time with them and when we start early. That's my major message for today. So with Jim, he was quite angry with himself. He got over it. He did, and he's still doing that everywhere. Hasn't changed. This is a little field study that we did. We changed the level of the early interaction, and we sort of followed some data through. So when we did that 10-day, we did a 10-day program. After Jim's program, we had a 7% shrink. So 7% of the body weight from the start day they actually lost. At adjusted averages, they lost 14 kilos per head at the end of weaning. Those 14 kilos is a bit of water, there's a bit of feed, there may be a little bit of muscle loss in that as well. When we changed it last year, we said we're going to do a fresh start program, start on the first day, go for 4 days. We put on 5% body weight by the end of the 4 days. We added 10 kilos and had a 24 kilo turnaround. So within that year, if we go $3 a kilo, we made $70 per head. Now, if you've got 1,000 head, that's a lot of cattle. That's a lot of money. That's $72,000 that we can go and buy 2 new Warwick crushers with next year. We don't need to, but hey, it'd be nice. So where are we at now? This is the new way forward that we're sort of working on this, and it's a work in progress. It's called a goal-orientated handling program. When we start on day 1, we're going to condense the work into small jobs around the place. We don't want to be spending an hour and a half, 2 hours. You know yourselves, we're in this here right now, and I'm standing in between you guys and lunch. Probably want me to wrap this up so we can go and eat, right? Intervals of attention aren't very strong, and in cattle they're less than they are in people. So 5 to 10 minute little lessons followed by a meaningful break, and you can do this 4 times a day if you want. So in that time you can go and work with them for 10 minutes and get something positive out of them, leave them at that, go and fix a fence, go and feed some cows, come back at lunchtime, do another one, and each time be expecting them to do things that are better. So with the goal-orientated program, we're taking these negative behaviours and we're wanting to see them stop. We want to stop bawling, and we know that we can effectively achieve that within a day. We reassign their brain to not thinking about their mother, but to interacting with humans, to interacting with each other, to seeing the fence, to seeing the bunk, to seeing the hay that we've put out. We want to teach cattle to stop. This is the time we want to teach them everything we want them to take forward for the rest of their life. This isn't just important for feedlot cattle, this is important for your replacement heifers also. Take them and teach them the right things at the start. Teach them to walk straight. Take them through a facility, and if you really want to, take them through backwards. That's pretty cool. We want to develop herd movement, and we want to develop herd behaviours. Herds that move together, eat together, drink together, have sex together, and usually die together. So if we can create that, we reduce the amount of digestive diversity in that pen. We reduce the amount of respiratory disease because we control the commingling. And it's a really simple way forward to changing health outcomes, not only for future, but on your own farm. So I don't know whether this will come up real well. This is actually just down the corner there. Enoch and I were driving past. I thought, hey, that looks pretty cool. Might use that in the talk. It's the Middle Years Positive Education Centre, right? It's just down the road there. Pretty cool little spot. I don't know what's in there, but it sounds cool. Sounds like a place I want to go and learn, right? I went to a vet school in North Queensland, and I think we just call it the Negative Education Centre. But this one looks like it's got like coke coming out of the bubblers, the whole lot. So the Positive Education Centre is essentially what we want to turn our yards into for these young stock that are vulnerable. There's an opportunity going begging there in many yards around the country where we say that we don't have the time to do it, but bloody hell we do. It's really important. Make it a positive education centre. Start with hello, teach them to stop, take the small movements into bigger ones and make it positive. If you expect change, you'll see change. And if you see change, you'll pat yourself on the back and you'll do it again next time. And that's how we build confidence in these feedlot pens. This is how we build confidence in weaners. So I'm going to show you, this is just a real simple day one interaction of an example of yard weaning. There's a small pen, it's quite solid, there's nowhere for these cattle to escape from. And each time these cattle passage past the handler, we're expecting a few more to move with them. We're expecting a little bit more control each time. And the goals that this handler is trying to do is just to take these cattle from corner to corner of this pen. Super simple stuff. This little bit of human contact is severely underrated, and we really can make that difference. Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to fly along and we're going to go watch a couple others. But how do we define success with weaners? We want them to be confident, right? We want them to be able to walk past a handler without harm. We want them to see what's pressuring them, but to also see where they're going at the same time. And you only do that when you're really walking. And then we want to see where you expect them to go. They need to be going in a direction that you can control. So what do I define as success? When I've taken cattle out of a pen, this is success right here. We've got a nonchalant operator hanging out on this fence here with his black hat on, and these calves, as they walk past, I want you to look at their lips as they go along. These cattle, as they walk past him, they lick and chew, and it's just pure oral emotion. These cattle are so excited that they've walked past him today. It's a brilliant, brilliant feeling for them. As they go past him, their ears turn back to him. They're always in contact with this guy. This isn't completely benign, but if we're getting cattle that are leaving like this, well, they might return back to the yards like that, and every time afterwards they leave like that, it's a reinforcement. So that's success for me. I've got some more success. We're not going to see those guys again. I'm sick of them. This is a friend of mine. We did a field day in Nebraska, in a little place called McCook in Nebraska. The lady on the horse is Sally. Sally's an extremely experienced pen rider, and we done a session with these cattle, these little red Angus guys here, and anyway, we put them through the facility and let them chill out, had a bit of a chat to the crowd, and I said to Sally, I said, I think they're ready. I want you to take one in backwards. So she did, and pokes that little guy back through the facility. And anyway, after that, I said, righto, Sally, I'm going to double down on this, Dale. Let's bet, case of beer, you can't take the whole lot and put them through there, and I'm going to video it, right? And so Sally goes, okay, you're on. Case of beer it is. And so Sally's in the turquoise shirt on little rail, little sorrel horse, and Dr. Tom Knopfsing, many of you have met him, this guy's the king. Dr. Tom's on Smokey there, Smokey's old barrel horse, and gets a little excited. That's why we keep him out of the action. So Sally, what she does to these calves, and watch the interaction of this is the animal that went in the first time, right? Licks and chews the entire way in there, and I'm sitting there going, I'm going to have to stump up for a case of beer here. Like, this isn't fun at all. And I'm going and saying, no, don't do it. Shit. Shit. And then at this point, I'm sort of reasoning with myself and saying, well, maybe you can share it with her. Like, she's not going to drink it all by herself. I hope. I'm going, this isn't any good. And all this pressure's coming from a long way away. And these cattle are just fighting each other to get in there. And then I'm sitting there going, oh my God, thank God. That guy there saved me a case of beer. I still gave her half a carton, but we split it, right? Okay, so that when I talk about taking cattle through a facility and then bringing back through backwards, that's pretty incredible video, right? And she's very, very talented, but it doesn't show the amount of work we put into those cattle to get them that settled. Guarantee you these cattle, when they first went through that facility, they screamed out the front of it. Took a little bit of work. We did it 2 times to take them through, but then the confidence and the position and the setup to take those cattle back was pretty special. Sorry, Sal, we've got to keep going. So, take-homes for today. Handling can minimise or multiply. Be a minimiser, not a multiplier. Minimise the stress. Maybe you can be a multiplier and multiply the confidence. But remember this, future behaviour is always determined with every handling, and when we do stuff that's negative, we get negatives. When we do things that are positive, we get growth. Extremely important. Now briefly, we've got a little bit of time left.
Yeah, a little bit of time, yeah.
Got a little bit of time. I'm going to get stuck in right now to some pre-vaccination work that we've done over the years that shows how we can add another bow to our quiver, arrow to our quiver, and take down BRD in the feedlot where this helps out. These are really shaky. If you have epilepsy, look away. So what we're looking at here, and we probably should blow it up, but this is some of our old data of the effect of pre-vaccination on IBR deaths. So IBR, for those that don't know, is infectious bovine rhinotracheitis virus. From a percentage of respiratory deaths, you can see that once upon a time, this is nearly 20% of all of our respiratory deaths. When we just use an MH vaccine, which is a Mannheimia hemolytica vaccine, this was the Bovillus MH vaccine that we were using at this stage, you see that we actually knocked down the IBR deaths by quite a bit. But once we start treating with MH plus IBR, we really can obliterate IBR from that system. IBR, and Enid's going to go through this in more detail, but IBR is bloody important in our country. It's a priming virus for other bacteria to jump down into the lung and start causing a ruckus. So when we pre-vaccinate with MH plus IBR, or when we pre-vaccinate with Rhinogard, 2 IBR vaccine products in our country, we know that we can tangibly reduce BRD morbidity and mortality. When we look at the effects of feedlot pre-vaccination on performance, once we start giving combination vaccines and getting a couple of shots into them, you can see that there's a clear performance benefit. You can see up in the top left here. But then when you start looking at feedlot performance on a feed intake per kilos, we're not seeing as much viral challenge, not seeing as much fever hit. So these cattle actually chew on through that transition period, and that bumps up their average daily gains and their as-fed feed intakes. So I'm going to leave you with one little story here on how little bits can make a big difference. This will be nearly the end of my talk. We've been really fortunate in our consultancy business to work all across the world, but particularly a lot within our own country. And this is down at King Island, a herd that we work with down there. And this is down towards the south of the island. You just see over in the distance is a little speck of Tasmania. And when you couldn't see Tasmania, you're demolished by a southern buster. So these yards had about 140-degree panoramic view of Bass Strait, which is really good when it's a day like that day. But when it's kind of wet and sleety and shit, well, it's not a very nice place to be. There's not many places to hide. Anyway, we had these little boys here. They were weaned calves that were just hanging out. They were down at that fence line, and the yards were sort of up where I'm standing here. And when we were waiting for these cattle to come backwards and forwards and jump in and jump out to preg test them, we'd bring up a mob of 250 each time and send them back. And while they were getting new ones, I'd jump down and sort of poked around with these guys. And just as I jumped in, like literally jumped the fence, about 6 of these little sensitive boys picked me up. Their heads went straight through the roof. They propped up, they faced up, and then they pissed off. They went from here and they went all the way across to where that little white house is. There's a fence down there, and they'd hit that fence. And so when they went, I'd just sort of follow them along. And I kid you not, we'd arc from about that banner to the end of that curtain there and just walk that distance. And as soon as they stopped, I'd stop and I'd take a few steps back and we'd just relax. I'd step in towards them again and they'd fly back across, and so I'd just walk with them until they stopped, and as soon as they'd see me stop, I'd stop as well. As we went through that day, I had a couple of mobs come and go, and so I had a little bit of time, and every time these cattle would get closer and closer and decide that they'd actually want to do a little bit more with me. So as they came up, it was easier to start them, it was easier to stop them, and then on the second day, I decided, hey, I'm going to do something with these guys. And while I was waiting for cattle, I had the yards open. I just walked out and I asked them to walk past me, and they went in the yards, and I put them through the facility. And they went through the facility and I put them back out there, so I wanted to see what I'd done. And it's that simple. You can muster a paddock by just not having a horse or not having a motorbike, just by understanding cattle want to stop and cattle want to see you and cattle want to walk by, and you can do all this stuff in big places with no setup. And yeah, that's about all I've got for today. And take homes are really starting weaning on day one. That's number one for me. And if you don't remember anything else, let's try and change that within our industry. So on that, I'd welcome any questions. Thanks for your attention and coming.